Louisiana is spending billions of dollars on its coastal program, but the big money could run out in the not too distant future.
John Snell tells us about the state's scramble to avoid a fiscal cliff.
The GPS on Mike Guidry's boat lies to him.
This is nothing but water right here. As you see land, that's areas I'm fishing.
Actually, the charter boat captain intentionally ignores 23 years worth of updates.
I want to know where my canals are, the land is.
His maps tell him where to look for submerged islands, rocks, or pilings, where land existed not so long ago.
It will not be long that people are going to mistake this for the Gulf of Mexico right here.
Hurricane Ida chewed up another 100 square miles of coast, much of it in Guidry's home of Lafourche Parish. You have seen a geological age unfold before your eyes.
Yes, and what the new story I'm telling people now, since Ida, it's the whole new bayou, area that it's not what we grew up in.
Guidry shares the frustration of many people in South Louisiana that it seemed to take forever to start addressing the problem. For the first time, Louisiana can throw serious money at the issue. $1.7 billion in the coastal program this year, much of it creating marsh, rebuilding islands.
Game-changing projects that are saving lives, they're saving livelihoods.
Ironically, most of the money flows from an environmental disaster, fines and settlements from the 2010 Gulf oil spill. Many of these projects sat on the drawing boards for years. Without the funding, they were dreams. But not so far down the road, the big money runs out.
We're calling it the fiscal cliff.
Simone Malaz with the group Restore the Mississippi River Delta notes the BP dollars stop flowing in 2032.
We know we need about $1 billion a year to sustain the program.
Spending on the coast could easily revert back to the levels of the early 2000s, a few $100 million a year, or sometimes the cost of one large project.
That's why we're not just sitting back on our rear end saying, well, for the next 9 years, we're on sound financial footing. We're looking off into the horizon.
State leaders in Baton Rouge and Washington eye a couple of options: tapping into a greater share of royalties oil and gas companies pay the federal government, and for the first time getting a piece of the pie when the government leases offshore rights for giant wind projects, a potential windfall worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Congressman Steve Scalise passed a bill out of the Republican-led House containing that language.
Even if they spent billions of dollars building wind projects in the Gulf, which they're looking at doing, Louisiana wouldn't even get any of the shares of the royalties that would be generated.
Republicans and Democrats in Washington seldom agree on much of anything. Supporters hope eventually for a rare bipartisan vote. Republicans allied with oil and gas, Democrats pushing alternative forms of energy, could both jump on board.
So we actually have some allies in this discussion about reinvesting those dollars.
We're already hearing from senators, both Republican and Democrat, who are very interested in this bill. I think this is a bill that, if we keep working on it, could end up on the president's desk.
Mike Guidry thinks Louisiana deserves a greater share of the pie, given the state supplies so much of the nation's energy needs.
Would you let somebody come and plant their garden in your yard and then leave after they dig it all up?
State leaders profess to being more optimistic today than in the past, but they warn the progress could halt unless Louisiana finds a way to avoid the fiscal cliff. John Snell, Fox 8 Local First.
To give you an idea of the kind of money we could be talking about here, in February, the federal government leased areas off the coasts of New York and New Jersey for potential wind energy. The winning companies bid over $4 billion for the right to build offshore windmills.